The war had not yet ended when the interrogations began. In the spring and summer of 1945, Allied intelligence officers sat across from some of the most capable military minds Germany had produced. Men who had coordinated armored offensives across 3 continents, who had held impossible defensive lines against overwhelming odds, who had studied war as both science and art. And the Americans, the British, the Soviets, they all wanted the same thing. Not confessions, not apologies. They wanted assessments. What did you think of our generals? The answers that emerged from those interrogation rooms and from the memoirs, letters, and after-action reports that followed were not what most expected. They were not flattering across the board. They were not diplomatic. They were the candid professional judgments of men who had spent years watching their opponents across the battlefield, reading their decisions in real time, paying for every mistake in lives and territory. Some Allied commanders earned their respect. Others did not. What the German generals said tells us something important, not just about the men they evaluated, but about the nature of command itself, and what separates competence from greatness in war. To understand how German generals evaluated their Allied counterparts, one must first understand what they valued. Officers like Erich von Manstein, Erwin Rommel, and Albert Kesselring had been shaped by the Wehrmacht's doctrinal emphasis on Auftragstaktik, mission-based tactics that rewarded initiative, speed, and adaptability at every level of command. In the German system, a general was expected to read a battle intuitively, exploit opportunity without waiting for orders, and accept personal responsibility for bold decisions. Hesitation was not a virtue. Caution had a cost. It was against this standard that the Allied commanders were judged. Rommel's name has become inseparable from North Africa, but even during the campaign that would define his legend, he was watching the men sent to stop him. His early assessments of British commanders were, in private, withering. He found them methodical where he was fluid, reactive where he was proactive. He wrote in his diary that the British system appeared designed to achieve competence rather than brilliance, which, he acknowledged, was not without its advantages. An army of competent men, properly supplied, would eventually grind down an army of brilliant ones running short of fuel. But then came El Alamein, and then came Patton. In the summer of 1944, as Allied forces broke out of the Normandy beachhead, something shifted in the German assessment. Reports began filtering up through Wehrmacht command about the speed of one particular American formation, the Third Army, commanded by General George S. Patton. What struck German officers was not just the rate of advance, it was the style of it. Patton moved the way they moved. He struck before the enemy could consolidate. He exploited success rather than pausing to secure it. He accepted calculated risk. Several German generals, including Manstein, regarded Patton as the Allied commander whose operational style most resembled German mobile warfare. This was not a compliment offered lightly by a man who had engineered the recapture of Kharkov with a force the world had assumed was destroyed. Manstein respected operational elegance above all else. In Patton, he saw it. Kesselring's assessment carried additional weight. As Commander-in-Chief South, he had watched American forces evolve from the stumbling formation that had been embarrassed at Kasserine Pass in February 1943 to the lethal operational machine that cracked through his lines 2 years later. He credited Patton specifically with accelerating that transformation. In his post-war memoir, Kesselring described American commanders as quick learners, more willing than the British to discard methods that had failed. Patton, in his view, was the fastest learner of all. German prisoners captured during the Lorraine campaign of late 1944 expressed, repeatedly and to multiple interrogators, a particular anxiety about facing Third Army units. This was documented. It was not propaganda. It was operational fear, the kind that comes from fighting a commander who does not give you time to recover. The German assessment of Bernard Montgomery was more complicated and considerably less flattering. Montgomery's operational record was, by any objective measure, significant. He had destroyed Rommel's army at El Alamein. He had commanded ground forces during the Normandy landings. He had led the Allied advance through Belgium and into Holland. But the German generals who evaluated him focused less on what he achieved and more on how long it took him to achieve it. Rommel, who knew Montgomery from the North African theater and studied him closely, acknowledged that he was a thorough and careful professional who rarely made costly errors. But Rommel's journals and correspondence reveal a consistent frustration with what he perceived as Montgomery's inability to press an advantage. After El Alamein, as the Eighth Army advanced westward, Rommel had expected pursuit. Instead, he found breathing room, and he used it to extend the campaign by months. In Rommel's professional calculus, that was a failure of nerve disguised as caution. Kesselring shared the assessment. During the Italian campaign, he repeatedly found that careful preparation for a defensive position would buy him time that a more aggressive Allied commander might not have allowed. Montgomery's preference for set-piece battles, thorough, methodical, artillery-heavy, was, in the German view, predictable. Predictability, to men raised in the Auftragstactik tradition, was nearly a tactical sin. Dwight Eisenhower presented an entirely different challenge to assess. He was not, in the German view, a battlefield commander in the traditional sense. They understood that. What they struggled to fully account for in the immediate post-war years was how much that actually mattered. Manstein's private characterization of Eisenhower was pointed. He believed Eisenhower's gift was administrative and political rather than operational. A coalition manager rather than a warfighter. This assessment, shared by several German general staff officers interviewed after the war, treated coalition management as a secondary skill. In the context of their own command culture, it was. German generals operated within a clear hierarchy and rarely had to negotiate between competing national interests. Eisenhower did every day for years. What the German professionals underestimated, and what historians have since argued more forcefully, was that maintaining the Anglo-American alliance through campaigns in North Africa, the Mediterranean, and Northwest Europe, while simultaneously managing relationships with the Soviet Union, coordinating air superiority doctrine with independent-minded air commanders, and sustaining political will on two continents required a form of strategic mastery that simply had no equivalent in German command experience. Eisenhower did not win battles. He won the war. The interrogation rooms of 1945 produced a remarkable archive of professional judgment. German generals, stripped of armies and commands, offered their assessments with the directness of men who no longer had anything to protect. They feared Patton. They respected but did not admire Montgomery. They underestimated Eisenhower in ways that revealed the limits of their own doctrinal framework. What emerges from those assessments is not a simple ranking of generals. It is a lesson about the nature of military competence itself, that the qualities prized in one system of war may be entirely invisible to those trained in another. Rommel could read a battlefield in minutes. He could not have held together an alliance for 4 years. Eisenhower could not have executed the recapture of Kharkov. Together, their armies ended the same war. The generals who survived the conflict spent the rest of their lives writing about what they had seen and faced. In their accounts, the enemy was always, in some measure, a mirror. What they praised and what they dismissed revealed as much about the Wehrmacht as it did about the men across the line. In the end, the most dangerous commander is not always the most brilliant one. Sometimes it is simply the one who wins. If this story pulled you deeper into the war room, hit like, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, where empires collapsed, legends were forged, and history was decided.